Joining us now on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Ann Patterson. I'm excited to have Ann on. She is a lifelong American diplomat, a career Foreign Service officer, and Ann was at one time served as Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs 2013 to 2017. And she also served as United States Ambassador to Egypt and Pakistan, July of 07 to October 2010 in Egypt until 2013. So Ann Patterson, I would say she knows a little about what's going on out there, having served as ambassador to Pakistan and Egypt, and then as a Foreign Service officer and Assistant Secretary of State of Near Eastern Affairs. Ambassador Patterson, great to have you.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be on your program, and thanks for your interest in foreign affairs in the Middle East.
Well, I know we spend a lot of time on it because it is a big issue, and it affects a lot of people indirectly that they don't know, but you got a lot going on. And I wanted to start, and with just your overview right now of what you see going on in the Gulf as it pertains to the blockade on Qatar, that crisis, the situation with the Khashoggi murder with Mohammed bin Salman, and he's been gravely made ineffectual, I think, as a leader in the area, and has hurt his relationship with the United States, and we don't know where that's going. Things are a mess right now. We got the pullout of Syria. Just give us an overview of the tenor and tone of what is going on right now.
Well, yeah, John, I think you hit on some of the main problems. And for those of us who worked on the region for a long time, and people like me, actually, I lived in Saudi Arabia for 4 years, and I have a great deal of affection for the country, and I'm very concerned about what's taking place there. And I actually agree with Lindsey Graham on this issue. The main worry is the unpredictability of the young prince, the crown prince. And I think the steps he has taken are not only from the Khashoggi killing, but the steps he's taken on the economy have been extremely erratic. The Wall Street Journal has had a series of articles about the departure of Western portfolio managers, about his selling Aramco. We see that he can't get foreign investment. We see a lot of capital flight. And of course, then there's the terrible problem of the war in Yemen, which is one of the humanitarian disasters of the decade, if not the century. And like you, what really disturbs me is the permanent deterioration of the relationship with the United States. When all is said and done, Saudi Arabia is a vital partner for us. Mm-hmm. And it's in nobody's interest to have a bad relationship or instability. And what you're seeing on the Hill now, these condemnations of Saudi Arabia, would have been unheard of even a few years ago. So I'm very worried about it. And on the blockade with Qatar, this has totally torn apart the Gulf Cooperation Council, totally destroyed it in my view. Qatar has actually survived the blockade very well economically. But there's huge bitterness in Qatar about the family separations. I don't think until you go there and you talk to people whose mother couldn't go to her uncle's funeral in Saudi Arabia, or they couldn't visit a sick brother in the United Arab Emirates, that you have a feeling for the depth of apprehension and about what has taken place here. So it's been very destructive to the GCC, and I think it's going to be terribly difficult to put back together. There have been economic impacts, too, but as I say, Qatar has weathered those pretty well.
Yeah, and some can actually say, having been there a couple times myself and talked to many people there, just regular people on the street, there was actually an argument to be made that their economy is better off after the blockade than before the blockade, because it forced the country to expand their trade routes out, deal with other countries, get a new deep shipping port on the other side. So they've expanded their trade and they've expanded their opportunities, and actually their GDP is up, wages are up, so they're doing pretty well. But it is the humanitarian crisis, as you say. Ann Patterson with us. Ann Patterson entered the Foreign Service of the United States, get this, 1973, And I don't want to date you, but that's a very long time. You got a lot of experience. And was also the ambassador to Egypt and ambassador of the United States to Pakistan. And so let's get to the Syrian situation. I was at an event put on by the U.S. Arab Council of Relations. I forget the exact name of it. I go there all the time. And they were focused on that. It was run by Dr. Anthony, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
Right, Dr. Anthony. And one of the people talking about it was saying that he agreed with drawing the troops down because he said basically as long as there's a U.S. presence there, you're never going to get anything solved, and you were better off turning it over to Erdogan, letting him solve the situation. He also said that he didn't believe that the Russians really had any interest beyond maintaining the status quo. And that was David de Roches said that. What do you think about the Syrian situation now, Ann Patterson?
So, John, I have a lot of respect for David and a lot of respect for people that have that view, that we should get out of Syria, but it's not my view. I think it's very important to maintain a modest military presence, and I think what people like David would say, well, that's not sufficient to do much. But actually, in my experience, it is, because the crucial thing about American presence is it gives confidence to other parties. There's no way Erdogan and Turkey, they want to eliminate the Kurds. We all know that. Where are the Kurds going to turn if we pull out? Well, they're going to turn to Assad to protect themselves against the Turks. So I think we need to maintain a modest presence there, really for quite a long time. I think what we've seen is that the Russians, I think that's probably true. They don't have any long-term interest in Syria, and they don't want to get into a quagmire either. But I think this pullback of American troops overseas is frankly a loss of American leadership.
Well, the president campaigned on getting out of there, and he said, even in his State of the Union speech, he said, look, we're done with these endless wars. You can't be a great country and fight endless wars and be the policeman of the world. So I guess my question is, do you just keep troops there in perpetuity?
Well, we do keep troops places in perpetuity, and frankly, it's been a runaway success. We have troops in Korea. Mm-hmm. We had troops in Europe. We have troops in Japan. And U.S. presence matters for a whole range of reasons apart from fighting wars. You develop alliances that are valuable over time with these countries. Both my sons, one son was in the Army and one son was in the Marines. And the son that was in the Marines participated in lots of exercises with countries in Asia. And those are valuable alliances that we have to maintain. And one way to maintain these alliances is with presence. Now, Syria is a more urgent issue, of course.
Right.
But I just don't think we can walk out the door and abandon the Kurds, although they've been abandoned many times, and just leave it to the other people in the neighborhood. None of them really wish well for the Syrian people.
Well, it was interesting too because at the forum yesterday, there was also, we heard from Dr. Ilya Samo, who was a Syrian American, talking about the intense suffering that has gone on there in the Syrian people, the number of refugees, and, there's a shortage of doctors. There's babies freezing because they can't get heat in the winter. It's just a horrible situation. And I guess now what he was saying is like the Assad regime is not going away. There's no way that Assad is going to be deposed, give up power. And so he said, we have to find a way to put this back together with Assad. Do you agree with that view?
Yeah, I'm afraid I do agree with that. Assad has won the war. And how he won the war was with Russian air power.
Right.
We shouldn't be under any illusions about that. And what I saw when I was in government, what the Russians did in Syria was simply beyond belief. They attacked infrastructure, they attacked sewage plants, they attacked hospitals. They went after the infrastructure that holds a society together, and frankly, it was very successful.
Why did they do that?
We have to deal with Assad somehow. We have to help our allies. We have to help Jordan and Lebanon, who have taken in millions of these poor Syrian refugees. we have to help them. We have to provide humanitarian assistance to these people because it's our responsibility in some respects as a world leader. And I think the American people always step up to the plate when they see these humanitarian catastrophes.
We're with Ambassador Ann Patterson. She was the former ambassador for the United States to Egypt and Pakistan. And from 2013 to 17, she was also the Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs for the State Department of the United States government. Ambassador Patterson, let's get back to the Gulf. So we have had, I don't know what's going on in the State Department right now. Nobody can really give me an answer to this, but there are so many openings in the Trump administration of key ambassador positions. And let's take, Saudi, they just nominated somebody for Saudi recently. That's been open for 2 years. It's almost incomprehensible that you wouldn't have an ambassador there. And now there's not one in Qatar. You mentioned them earlier. Qatar is still open. There's nobody even nominated for that. Isn't the fact that we don't have an ambassador in some of these key countries that we have alliances with, like Qatar, for instance, isn't that harmful to overall United States interest and security, especially in Qatar with the biggest base that we have?
John, this is a terrible problem, I think, because we don't have ambassadors in Egypt or Jordan or the UAE either. In
right.
Our critical Arab countries, they've been vacant for almost 2 years. And I know from experience that it's only the ambassador who can go to the leader of the country or the foreign minister or the finance member and really talk turkey to them. So you have to have these people in place. Now, the administration has been very slow in naming people for some of these jobs. General Abizaid got named recently for Saudi Arabia, and everybody who knows anything about Saudi Arabia thinks he's an excellent choice. But yes, it's a terrible problem. The other problem is, frankly, the process of naming an ambassador has gotten so slow, and the evaluations of the finances and the health, and anybody you've ever known is painfully slow. So it's one, the administration's been slow in naming people, and two, the process is broken. But we have to get people into these jobs. In Qatar, there are rumors that a former congressman is going to be named, but his name has not yet been formally put forward. But I assume when it is, the committee will schedule a hearing rapidly for him.
Well, that would be, we have heard that was reported in one of the news outlets around Christmas, that former Democratic Congressman, 2nd District of Virginia, Scott Taylor, would be nominated for the ambassadorship of Qatar, like you mentioned. I think Taylor, unequivocally qualified, has been there, has served at that base, has been to Doha many times, understands the country, and served. Obviously, he was an former Navy SEAL, and he served in Congress on the Armed Services Committee. So I think the President Trump sees him as somebody that is eminently qualified for that position. But as you say, prior to that, they had nominated a career diplomat, and of course you're familiar with that, Charge d'Affaires. But from talking to people in D.C., Ambassador Patterson, what they're telling me is, look, if you have a key Middle Eastern ally and you don't name, the administration doesn't give the country a political appointment from the administration, and they make it a career position. I've been told by a number of people that follow this, that have been there, that Middle Eastern governments like UAE, like Jordan, like Qatar, see that as kind of a slap in the face, like they don't matter. Whether it's true or not, that's the perception of reality. So, it's just beyond me that the Trump administration hasn't filled these positions quickly.
Oh, John, I don't think that's necessarily true about career people. Sometimes countries are, frankly, glad to have a career person who understands the country and speaks the language. It often, frankly, comes down to the person. Mm-hmm. And the real issue I think you're getting at is access to the White House. And there's certainly career people who can have access to the White House. But what career people totally understand is that, and this has been true across many administrations for many years, About a third of the embassies go to political appointees, and about two-thirds go to career people. Saudi Arabia hasn't had a career ambassador, since the mid-'80s. So they've always wanted a political appointee and, frankly, always had one. So a lot depends on the personality, but the real issue is get somebody out there. Get somebody out there who can talk to the White House, who has access to the President, who has access to the Secretary of State, and more importantly, has access to the leaders of the country and can talk to them as a representative of the United States of America.
I mean, I got to tell you, Ambassador Patterson, the fact that the number of countries you mentioned that are open, Saudi is still open, but they have nominated someone. He'll go through the confirmation process, but no one nominated for, as of today, for Qatar, for the United Arab Emirates, for Jordan. Who else?
I think they did. They nominated a hotel executive for the Emirates, and I don't know the status of his nomination. And Egypt is a 100 million person, the heart of the Arab world in many respects, and there's nobody nominated for Egypt. So these countries are absolutely key to any implementation of policy in the Middle East, and they need to get somebody there. I'm sure that I know many of the chargés in these countries, they're excellent, but they just don't have the clout that an ambassador would have.
Well, 2 years into the administration, and no one nominated for key allies that we have, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar being three that you just mentioned. Of course, Scott Taylor mentioned for Qatar, but until you're nominated, it's just rumor, right? It doesn't mean anything. And also,
it's just rumor. And what they tell you and is to keep your head down before you get nominated, because, frankly, you don't want to irritate the senators who have to pronounce on your nomination. It's up to them to really give their consent. So they tell you to keep your head down and keep out of the press.
And last week I had your former colleague, former Ambassador Patrick Theros on my show, Ambassador Patterson, and he said something interesting. He said that after you asked about the nomination, you start the process, that the political appointee is actually presented to the country, the accepting country, and they can reject that ambassador and say, no, we don't want that person. True or false?
That's true, absolutely. It's called agrément. It's an old-fashioned French word, but basically they get a chance to turn the person down. It's super rare that happens, but I've seen it happen a couple times. Most countries, frankly, would never ever question who the administration wants to send unless there's some very unusual situation. But that's true. I would be astonished if it happened in any of these situations and that we just mentioned.
I was told that the first ambassador candidate the Trump administration named to Chile was rejected by the Chilean government because he had spent time in the U.S. CIA, and they were like, "No, we don't want any CIA people here." That's what somebody told me. So his name got bagged after that. I'm not even going to go into that. We don't have time. But look, at the end of the day, the Trump administration really needs to get these positions filled with qualified people very quickly, because 2 years into it, Egypt open, Jordan open, Qatar open. I think it's hurts our standing and is an impediment to U.S. ongoing national security. Ambassador Patterson, thanks for sharing that. We look forward to having you back, and we want to continue to get your perspectives on what is going on in the Middle East. Thank you so much.